And welcome back to the second hour of Money Talk with Melanie. I'm your business diva, Melanie Collette, broadcasting live again from Cape May County, New Jersey via SHR Media. And our guest for the second hour is Dr. Donald Chambers. He is an author and speaker in the fields of economics, finance, and investments. He has appeared on national radio and TV, including CNBC, and is a regular on 45 Fortune. In addition, he has appeared frequently on regional TV and radio programs. He served as a speaker at numerous conferences and academic institutions and has provided content for newspapers and magazines. He's got a lot of great articles out there. I ran into some of them as I was doing my research. Now, for many years, he was active as an expert witness, testifying in over 50 court cases and arbitrations regarding investment disputes. Dr. Chambers is an emeritus professor of finance at Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania. He currently serves as Chief Investment Officer and Model Portfolios at Biltmore Capital Investors, as well as the Associate Director of Programs at the CAIA Association. He's previously served at the Bank of New York on a consulting basis in risk management regarding the bank's many diverse operations involving credit risk, event risk, capital cost allocation, and operational risk. And without further ado, Dr. Don Chambers, how are you this evening?
I'm fine. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you on the show. I hope you are well. I apologize for the long break before we got on the air. But I'm very excited about talking to my audience about your upcoming book entitled Freedom First: Brief Readings on Liberty, Peace, and Prosperity. And when I saw that you're an emeritus professor of finance at Lafayette College, I thought to myself, I'm originally from the Philadelphia area. I'm just an adjunct professor, and I thought, in other words, he's a real professor. As opposed to what I am, to teach a class every now and then. He's an actual real live professor. So I appreciate a man of your expertise being on my show today. Is there anything in your bio that I left out?
No, you were more than adequate. I did 36 years of teaching, and I'm proud of that. And I'm also happy to be moving on to doing other things like programs like this.
Well, that is excellent. So tell me a bit about your book and why you decided to write it.
Well, I have a close friend who I would share stories with about what's happening in the classroom and the discussions we would have, and he said, "Don, you ought to write a book." So that's what I did. I tried to make it light and entertaining with 118 short stories that aren't in any particular sequence, so they kind of pick it up and put it down. And it centers around three messages. One is to celebrate how incredibly lucky we are and blessed to be in a country that has been the shining light of wealth and entrepreneurship and created virtually every invention that the world enjoys. And to talk about the importance of keeping markets free. I also talk about natural rights, and I throw in a number of stories about the sort of experiments we did in class and things like that.
Oh, I love that. Now, I want to touch upon what you said about keeping the markets free. And I'd love for you to explain that there's a lot of hubbub going on, if you will, to use an older term, going on in the news and things like that about the different types about capitalism being bad, about free markets not being, the wonderful thing that I think they am. I tend to agree with you that we are very fortunate to live in a country that has a free market. You're hearing the words communism and socialism being thrown around. So I love to hear your take on. First of all, explain to the audience a little bit what a free market is in earnest, because I think when people hear the term free market, they don't exactly understand what it is.
A free market is where the participants, the citizens, have a right to own property, and they have a right to exchange that property without really obstructive government interference in terms of setting prices or not allowing it. So most of the things that you and I own
I think you're right about that. Now, you explained very aptly what a free market is. And I think that people don't understand that in other countries, you don't have that privilege to open whatever kind of business you want. You don't have that privilege or that opportunity. Like, for example, in a place like, I don't know, China, North Korea, someplace like that, you can't just go ahead and say, I'm going to open a landscaping business if I want.
That's right. And that's the worst type of socialism. I like to describe there's two types of socialism. The worst socialism, and it's the one that economists mean when they use the word socialism, is when the government is in charge of who makes what, and they control the businesses and the organizations that operate. That's what North Korea is like, and it's just horrible. In terms of, look at what's happening in Venezuela, North Korea, in the old days, East Germany. The other type of socialism is not probably correctly called socialism, but that's what we refer to it as, and that is this welfare, this wealth redistribution idea that education should be free and healthcare should be free, everybody should be guaranteed a job, and on the list goes. That's also now coming under the heading of socialism, and it's bad, but it's not as horrible as when the government interferes with the productive sector, the production sector.
So would you say that's like socialism light? Like how would you I was going to say, how would you refer to that? Because I think what people fear when they say that it's socialism is like it's a stepping stone to socialism. It's like, people who say that marijuana is a gateway drug. It's like it's the gateway to socialism.
Yeah, there's no doubt it's the gateway. And remember, when a government is allowed to take increasing powers, they're not going to stop where you might want them to stop. So those that think, it'd be wonderful if we got some wealth redistribution, and believe me, that's a bad thing. But you might say, we'll just let them do that. They're not going to stop there. It's very difficult to find in history a government that actually retreats absent anything other than an economic collapse, which forces them to.
Exactly, and you see that going on in places like Venezuela.
Yeah, yes, it will, and we've seen it in Greece, and I've spent a bunch of time in Greece, and that's that level of socialism where you start to see the destruction. But I don't think a lot of people get what America has done in terms of the world. And so let me just briefly say that in the last 150 years, virtually every major advance or invention was either invented in the United States or made accessible to the ordinary person in the United States. And if you go through the list, it's unbelievable. Everything from, of course, you think of Edison and Alexander Graham Bell and George Eastman and all the things they did, all the way right through more modern days with the microchip and PCs and the internet, video. It's all come out of the United States. So I say that we're lucky to live in the United States and all the medical advances, I might add. But the rest of the world is lucky that there is a United States, because without the United States, the whole world is going to descend back into the Dark Ages. I know that sounds dramatic. It's consistent with Ayn Rand's writings, by the way.
Oh, yes. Briefly explain to the audience. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt. Go ahead.
Oh, that's good. And it's absolutely true. And it takes more time than we had to talk about it. It's hopefully going to be the topic of my next book. But that when you don't have a market to observe, everything falls apart. And it might fall apart slowly, but it will fall apart because you just don't know how to make decisions without market prices. And you say, well, other countries make decisions. They do it by observing the market prices of countries that have market economies. It's the only way you can make decisions.
Now that's a very interesting point that you bring up there, that people keep their eye on, for the most part, the United States and places like the UK, people that have very large, very strong economies.
Exactly. And they'll say, a lot of people say, this is actually a chapter in my book, that it's horrible that the Soviet Union and China and other countries have been literally stealing our blueprints. They didn't know how to make a car and a space shuttle and things like that. They would literally steal our blueprints. But that wasn't the real quote-unquote theft. The real theft is that they could look over at the very efficient decisions we were making between how much prices, they can understand the most efficient way for them to make something. And without those market prices to observe, if you just stop to think about trying to make something in a world without market prices, you'd have no idea what materials to use, because nobody can understand the implications of every piece of material that they use. So in a modern economy, it absolutely can't work unless there's at least one major country that has well-developed capital markets.
That is, you know what, I always thought about China as stealing our intellectual property, but you bring about it's really bad to have a dead airtime when you do a radio show, but I really want to sit and contemplate what you just said for a minute, because that's seriously, because that's a very interesting point that you just brought up, that the real theft is them really using our method of running our economy, so to speak, without using our method of economy, without letting their people benefit from an actual free market economy.
That's right. There's a great little tiny article, tiny to me, reasonably sized article. It was written by Leonard Reed probably 60 or 70 years ago, called iPencil. And it describes how nobody knows how to make a pencil, because when you really stop to think about it, even the simplest part of that pencil requires, like the wood, requires chainsaws to cut down the trees and trucks to bring the trees to the mill. So nobody really knows by themselves. It's us working together in an economy, a market-based economy, that gets it done. But I go one step further. It's not just that nobody knows all the inputs to the pencil. Nobody can possibly attach values to those inputs, because they have no idea about where the supply and the demands are and what values it might have to other people. So unless you have some way of communicating values, there's no way to make decisions like which wood should I put in the pencil, which metal should I use to attach the eraser to the wood. And in our economy, it's so easy. You say, well, I'll use the cheapest metal that gets the job done. I'll use the cheapest wood that gets it done. But if you're in a country without market prices, you've got no idea which wood is the most efficient wood to use, which metal is the most efficient metal to use. It's a total meltdown. If you really meditate on the idea of making decisions like that without market prices, you realize how in a modern economy it's impossible. And in fact, it's these economies, these markets, that allowed us to double our lifespans in the last 150 years and do medical miracles.
Now, how so? Make the connection for me and the audience, please.
Well, it's market prices that allow a person to be efficient. And when one person can be efficient at doing one task, it frees up other people to do other tasks. So, for instance, we've got to the point in the United States where we can feed our entire population with less than 5% of our workforce. And it used to take over 50% of our workforce. So that frees up the other 45% to put their energies into other things that we enjoy or need, like medical advances. And all of this efficiency requires a perception of using inputs that cost less than the product is worth. And how can you possibly know whether what you're making is worth what you're producing unless you have prices, market prices? And, I had no idea why gold is worth more than silver. I don't understand it. And nobody could understand it unless they could travel the whole world and know how much gold and how much silver exists in each region and what the demand for it, how it can be used. And all of that information, which no person can gather, is reduced into two prices, the price of gold and the price of silver. And once we know those prices, it's easy to make decisions. If the silver will work, use it, because it's a lot cheaper.
You just now, as much education as I have, and as into money as I am, and as much as I know about the free market, and I'm sure many of my listeners who are listening are thinking the same thing. You just peeled back the curtain on one aspect that I had not thought about. That's huge. Your students are very fortunate to have you as a professor.
Well, let me be honest about this. I got virtually all the course requirements done to complete a PhD in economics at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and I'm not condemning the program at all. I decided to get the PhD in finance, so I didn't do my dissertation in finance. And all of that economics didn't teach me what I just said. And branch of economics called Austrian economics, and that's where this is taught. And there's very few places that teach Austrian economics.
Is that what the Mises Institute does?
Yes.
Yes.
And Mises are two of the grandfathers, if you will, of the movement. It's a very charming branch of economics because it doesn't use mathematics. And it talks, rather than organizations, it talks about behaviors emanating from the individual. And it's kind of verbose, but it's an enjoyable discipline to read. And there's a lot of great, if you go on the web and start to look for introductions to Austrian economics. But it really takes a lot of thinking before you get what they're saying.
It does. And the Mises Institute, if anybody's ever been there, I highly recommend going to, I believe it's Mises.org. I haven't had a guest on my show from the Mises Institute in quite a while. I'm overdue. Because it is a whole different kind of segment of economics and a whole different way of thinking, but it's really awesome. They really do some fine work.
I'll be honest with you, it was maybe 20 years ago, I was at Lafayette College, and an alumnus came to the college and said, I'd like to give a bunch of money for you to study Austrian economics. I didn't know what it was. So I started to learn it from this man, and he and I became very friendly, by the way. And the book that I wrote is dedicated to him, by the way. He passed away last year. And he taught me Austrian economics. Here I am with a virtual PhD in economics, and he taught me all of this stuff. And I knew that free markets work. I just didn't know really at a deep level why they work. And now I get it.
And now I get it. Thanks to you. That is, and now my audience gets it there, because that is, I want like every finance show on cable and mainstream news to say what you just said, because it's just, it really is common sense, but it is definitely, as a professor, you'll understand, it's definitely a higher thinking Bloom's kind of questioning that what we just talked about. That's higher level learning there, but because that's an aspect that of free markets that I had not even considered.
There's a lot of people that condemn markets, and I've gone to economists occasionally and said, well, suppose that all markets, all trade was abolished. You couldn't do any trading. And how do you think that would affect your life? And some will say, well, will you give us a little time to prepare? And I said, yeah, a year. You know that a year from today, nobody can ever trade with anybody else again. How do you think that'll work? And they'll say, well, that would cut back our standard of living. And I let him think about it for a while. And the correct answer is that virtually everybody would die, and they would die very quickly. It's the only thing that keeps us alive. We need water. That would mean that everybody would have to live near water. And you'd say, oh, no, we just pump it out to the regions. And like, no, you can't pump it out because that's trading. You're trading with the people who do the pumping or own the pump or made the pump. And we find out that society will absolutely die. There might be some exceptions in some climates where there's just fish all over the place or something, but we would die really quickly.
So let me ask you this, and this is strictly, I want to know what your educated opinion is on this. Why do you think it is that people have such dramatic differences between how they feel the economy should work? For example, why do you think the AOCs of the world and the borderline communists of the world think that it's perfectly okay not to have a free market and that the government should take more care of people and have more control? Why do you think that they are so insistent on that? Is it because they really don't understand basic economics, or that they have a whole different mindset about economics? Like, is there a form of economics or some place on the face of the earth that has the same size economy as we do, where free markets don't work, where something other than a free market works? And where is that?
I'm pretty proud of having spent the last 15 to 20 years to finally figure out what makes an economy work. But I'll be darned if I can figure out how the minds of these leftists. I don't think another 15 or 20 years would help me. I mean, I talk with my students who come out of this leftist teaching, and they're convinced that healthcare quality is deteriorating. I said, you don't really mean that you would have rather been sick 20 years ago than today. die? And they say, yes. Oh, my goodness, my grandfather got a heart attack, and all they knew to do back then is sit in the hospital and wait until you die. It took him 8 days to die. And my father died of heart trouble. And with me, now I'm realizing you can get a valve replaced through a vein. It's unbelievable what the medical advances. And in the last 150 years, our lifespan is more than doubled from age of birth expected life. So how can they look at this? They think that the pollution is worse than it used to be. And the answer is no, we've really cleaned up the water and the air. Not everywhere, but as a general rule, we're dramatically cleaner in both of those regards. They think that income inequality is so horrible. And let me just finish on this little point. When you think in terms of numbers, sure, Bill Gates is more than 1,000 times richer than I am. But you know what? The quality of our lives in this 21st century is so much closer to each other than it was 150 years ago. My quality of life is like many people, most of the people in this country, if we use our money wisely. We can be in air conditioning, have great entertainment, fresh food, clean water, absolutely wonderful lifestyles and clothing, and short work weeks, so you have only 40 hours a week, compared with 150 years ago, when the difference between being rich and poor was literally enough food to live on and not enough food to live on. But our transportation, Bill Gates' life is not that much better than mine. It really isn't. We can both fly to any country we want to. We can eat great food year round. We can live in air-conditioned and heated places. We're safe. Our transportation is safe. Our quality of life is so uniform, but all these leftists can do is look at the idea that somebody has more than they do. They don't understand why they have more than they do, why other people have more. And the way that I look at it is that Bill Gates made a lot of money off me, but my life is way better. Bill Gates did more for me than I did for him, because the products that he's given me, it made me so productive. And I've only given him maybe $1,000 for all of that. So these people have made us better off. I don't feel that they've cheated me. They've made my life better off. And I don't know why the leftists can't see that.
I mean, what would we do if Windows hadn't been created? Just think about that. Seriously, just think about that one small, and that's just a small thing that Bill Gates has contributed to the world. Just the advent of the Windows operating system. Just that alone. Think of how many doors that has opened and how many comforts that affords us.
Yeah, and Microsoft Office.
Right.
And, use their spreadsheets and their software. It's unbelievable how in writing these books, I do actually write a lot of books, most of them in investments, and it's amazing how productive the internet has made me. And this is all attributable to, these people. Yes, they've become wealthy, but they've made me and everybody else better off as well. I don't know where these leftists can see anything other than tragedy in reversing into socialism. I don't think they understand incentives. I don't think that they understand that what happens in socialistic governance. And I don't think, and by the way, when you try to have an argument with the leftists, when they start to lose, as they inevitably will, they just change the topic.
Oh, or to personal attacks. They typically change it to a personal attack.
All of a sudden, I become a racist.
Oh, well, everybody's a racist. I'm a racist. Don't you know? I'm brown and I'm as racist as they come. I'm but I'm worse because I'm brown. So I'm a self-hating racist.
They can partially forgive me. I don't think they can forgive me.
No, believe me, they will not forgive me. During the first hour of the show, I actually talked about how I was in a business meeting today and I was sitting next to someone who was apparently looking at my computer while I was taking notes on it. And I guess he saw that I voted for Donald Trump. I don't even know what I was on that he would have seen that, but apparently he saw it. And he said, don't tell me. I barely know this guy, but he says to me, don't tell me you voted for Donald Trump. Don't tell me you're a Trump supporter. And I said to him, how would you even know that I'm a Trump supporter? And he's like, I saw it on your computer. First of all, like major violations. Like you're looking at my computer and then you have the nerve to talk to me about it. And I'm sure part of the reason is because he found it so shocking is because I'm brown. But one of the biggest parts is because I'm a free market person. That's, one of the reasons why I voted for him as opposed to Hillary, who is a complete government person. But, people seem to think that they can just, leftists in particular, seem to think that they have this moral high ground that I don't quite understand. And it is all moral and emotional. It's not based on hardly any kind of facts at all.
You are right. It's emotional and it's identity based as well.
It is. And you would think that as emotional as they are, you would think that they would understand other emotions besides the empathy that they claim to have, like egos and narcissism and, people who have a thirst for power. You would think that they would understand those emotions as well and how those factor in governments where you don't have a free market. Kim Jong-un comes to mind. But they don't seem to identify with the negative emotions that are associated with things like dictatorships and how that affects the government.
It blows my mind how they can't see the brutality going on, not just in North Korea, but in the Middle East and elsewhere. And I spent 36 years on campuses. I never heard a complaint about the way homosexuals are treated, how women are treated. No complaints about that going on in those other countries. Instead, they're outraged over the slightest comment that Trump will make. And I'll tell you why I voted for Trump. And that's because my wife told me to.
Well, your wife is a wise woman.
we were standing in line, and I certainly wasn't going to vote for Hillary. But I thought maybe I would write in for like Rand Paul or somebody because I was upset by his some of the things he said, not his policies, just the way that I thought he was treating other people.
As I was.
She has much better instincts, and she just turned me and said, "Vote for him, or you'll always regret it." And boy, I was thankful that I did.
Well, because anybody else was a statistical vote for Hillary. That's the thing.
So she was wise, and I'm now so happy to have him as president, and the way that he is, I feel, trying to turn back this horrible thing that's overtaking this country. If we didn't have a guy like him, I don't know who would stop it.
You're so right. And, you look at our situation here in the United States, our economic situation, the poor person is wealthier than a poor person in any other country. Like poor people here don't even really understand what poor means.
Well, obesity is a problem amongst our poor people, and I think that says it all.
Right?
If you've got enough money to overeat, you're not poor like other countries.
Exactly. Those people are legitimately poor. Well, I want to talk about your book, the latest book that you have coming out. And I want you to share one of the funniest stories that you have in the book that we can look forward to reading.
Well, I actually wouldn't claim that the stories themselves are horribly funny, but I try to throw jokes, a bunch of jokes in it and keep it light because the part of the title is that it's trying to improve life, liberty, and peace. Peace is a part of it. It's really meant to be a book that if we see natural rights for what they are, we can stop fighting with each other. When we start to violate natural rights, then people have to protect themselves from other people in the political process, and that's when I think the animosity really begins. But I think a humorous, one of the little humorous things was when it's actually a bad event is when Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, decided that a person that pays that does not buy health insurance is committing an economic act, and that because the Constitution they've stretched and they're wrong about it, but they stretched to say that the federal government can control economic acts. Well, not buying something isn't an economic act; it's the failure to perform an economic act. But he called it an economic act, and it now says that they can not only run our lives in terms of the decisions we make and the actions we take,
now what you're doing is you are thinking logically and not like some lawyers think. Like they think they can. And I really just think that he was the swing vote on the court, and he didn't want to be responsible for the destruction of Obamacare. And he,
I agree.
You know,
it's a precedent, and that's the problem with precedent. And this whole idea that the federal government can mess with our lives goes back to a case that I talk about in one of the 118 stories, which was Roscoe Filburn and is being told by the federal government that he couldn't grow wheat on his own land. And that was a Supreme Court decision, and that's been upheld for decades now, that the federal government has the right to simply tell us what we can and cannot do, even if it doesn't involve interstate trade in any meaningful way.
It's literally the opposite of the Constitution.
Yeah. The Interstate Commerce Clause was there to promote interstate trade and prevent fraud, maybe. But they've used it now to regulate and budget every way they get to, every chance they get.
Do you have an opinion, speaking of interstate commerce, do you have an opinion on why, and this is, again, strictly because of your level of intellect, I bet you have an answer for this. Why in the world they have not done the interstate trading as far as insurance is concerned? Because that is something that we've been promised and still has not happened.
Well, I think the honest answer is that there's a lot of powerful interests that want to prevent that. It's an inefficient system, which means a whole bunch of money is being paid to some people that aren't necessary. So those people are going to make darn sure it doesn't happen because they don't want to lose their jobs.
I was hoping
a small defense to it, and this idea is that that if states are allowed to make different sets of rules, then there will be competition amongst the states, and we can learn from the different states. But I think that the idea that insurance companies should be able to work across state borders is perfectly consistent with the Constitution, and regulating that and preventing that is not consistent with the Constitution.
Exactly. That's what I think as well. And as somebody who sells insurance, I certainly, because what happens is, and you're right, now that I'm thinking about just how much it costs to maintain as a financial advisor, to maintain a license, just that, and how many producers there are in the world, and how many people, maintain those kinds of licenses. Each state makes so much money just off of us doing our continuing education and getting our licenses. And then if I want to get a license in another state, then that's another, $100 or whatever I have to pay for each state I want to get a license in. I mean, there are some powerful entities that are making out by keeping things the way they are.
Exactly. If you re-fingerprinted in the states that I found, it's just absolutely ridiculous. It's just a money machine, and they don't want to shut it off.
Oh, that makes me mad. I was hoping that there was some deeper, much more profound answer to that question that I had not thought of. Well, listen,
as the one movie said, always follow the money.
Always follow the money. Well, listen, I want you to tell the listeners how they can get in touch with you, where they can buy your books, and if you are on social media anywhere, where they can follow you.
The best way I think to get the book is with my publisher, which is Defiance Press. We're just defiancepress.com. It can also be purchased at Barnes & Noble and Amazon. And it's Freedom First by Donald R. Chambers. And I do have a website. It's simply donaldarchambers.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being on the show. You were awesome.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it, Melanie, and I'd love to do it anytime you want.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I definitely will have you back. I appreciate it so much. Dr. Donald Chambers, Freedom First, Brief Readings on Liberty, Peace, and Prosperity. Be sure to pick up that book. By the way, I think a friend of yours was in my Facebook chat. Josh Deloy was in the Facey chat. He posted where to get your book as well.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
I know, that was very kind of him. You're listening to Money Talk with Melanie. I'm your business diva, Melanie Collette. I'm glad that you stayed with me for these couple of hours. Remember, all of this is very important because after all, it's your money. Have a great night.